And because it exposes the criminal behavior of what's going on right now regarding COVID-19, of not one word about nutrition in the protocols that they're suggesting. Not one. I use the word criminal because I think that's what it is. I know why they don't. Because the drug companies can't make billions of dollars on nutritional advice. I was just asked the other day by someone new to us if I was the Forbidden Doctor. Well, of course I said no. The Forbidden Doctor is not me at all.
We are not the Forbidden Doctor. Jack is not the Forbidden Doctor. It's in you.
The Forbidden Doctor is that magical, mystical power inside of you that is controlling and healing you.
It's that beautiful, marvelous, almost miraculous force that controls all healing.
It's that innate intelligence, that life force-directed influence that triggered your DNA to guide the building of your body after conception.
Yeah, it's that power that sustains your life, repairs your wounds and lesions, and it never stops working. It's that essential part of you that keeps you alive and heals your every hurt.
This is the Forbidden Doctor. It's not me. It's that part of you the powers that be have decreed forbidden to ever learn about or even consider, and never ever rely upon. For it is forbidden that you even know this life force exists at all.
You are your own Forbidden Doctor.
Yes. Hey everybody, Dr. Jack here. This is podcast 194. Are we looking at an extinction-level event? What we have for you is a recent radio show I did at KTALK Radio in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is a live broadcast that I do every Wednesday morning. This show should be titled, What is a Virus? But the powers that be will not allow the word virus or COVID-19 or coronavirus or immune system support or any words like those to be displayed anywhere. Not on our website, Facebook, podcasts, webinar titles, nowhere. This is akin to digital book burning. But so far, I can still speak the illegal words, as I did on my radio show yesterday. This is a show on the recent virus hysteria and my take on Dr. Thomas Cowan's take as to what's going on. You can hear my live radio show online every Wednesday morning, 7 a.m. Mountain Time, by downloading the Simple Radio app to your phone. Then search for the words KTALK, KTALK. Please enjoy. All right, good morning, everybody. It is 6 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock here at KTALK. The Voice of Utah, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show version of it, and this morning the doctor is in. Two guesses what I'm going to talk about. You can't get away from it, and I'm going to take a little different spin on it today. Because I want to get into the medical end of what's going on. I know a lot of you will want to get into the conspiratorial political stuff. I might leave that to somebody else. I might make a couple of comments about it later on. But I want to get into what you're not being told. I want to bring in the bent that is part of the Forbidden Doctor that Mary and I and so many other people have been involved with. That kind of event that, what are you not being told? What's the forbidden information? What should you know about this that you're not being told? And that might help you to better see the political end of it. So with that having been said, a couple of announcements here I want to make. Number one, we're open. Our practice is open. The mentally derelict governor of Colorado closed down chiropractic offices in Colorado. as non-essential, considering them to be elective procedures. I'd like him to say that to about a half a dozen people I've seen the last 2 days. That they came in suffering as they did and tell them it was non-essential. One fellow was in a horrible accident 5 weeks ago. His wife was driving the Suburban. They hit a deer. The deer came under the right front wheel, bent it outwards. They ran off the road, rolled. She was killed. He survived. I think he would like to have died because of the condition he was in. Fracture in his neck, fracture in his lower spine. He's in a wheelchair, and he came in Monday, and he only has use of the right side of his body. I worked on him for a good 2 hours, and when he left, he had control of the left side of his body. And very grateful, very thankful that he could come in. Tell me that wasn't essential. And other people as well. Another lady came in yesterday feeling like her scalp was on fire and pins and needles up and down her neck. And she just texted me. And she, with a bunch of balloons and smiley faces and hearts, "I'm back," just showed up on the phone. So, I'm glad Governor Herbert hasn't gone off the deep end with such nonsense as that. And I want to get into a little bit more of that in the show today as well. So through as long as the stay home stuff is going on, we're offering 2 for 1 two for the price of one at the office. Yeah, maybe the whole month of April. Maybe the whole month of April anyway, even if it lets up before April's over. Because this is for new patients, and this is for people who need our care. And a surprising thing, almost shocking thing to me is how many people, after I worked on them, said, "I had no idea." Well, what do you think we do here? "I had no idea you could do this." Well, most of the problems with the human body break down into 2 areas. One is severe malnutrition, which almost all Americans suffer to some degree or another, especially those who are succumbing to COVID-19. And the other is structural imbalance. Structural imbalance, it causes the freezing up of muscles and joints. And once that imbalance is fixed, everything's fine. All right, another thing I want to mention is the webinar tomorrow morning. Mary and I will be doing a live question-answer webinar because I'm sure there's a lot of questions I will not get to in the show today at 9 a.m., but you have to register for it. You have to go to forbiddendoctor.com, and there on the landing page, over to the right and down about halfway, you'll see that's right under the scrolling banner, you'll see register for webinar. And then you'll be given a link, and then you can listen to what's going on and be a part of it. Also, I want to mention many of you are members of our VIP program, our telemedicine program, where you can deal directly with Mary and I and Carrie or Dr. Josh or whoever you want to talk to through texting. Now, I don't want to say 24/7, but it's usually just during business hours. But we do answer, when I see them, I answer text after hours. And where you can text me directly. "Hey, I got a problem with this. My mother has a problem with that. My brother just had this happen to him. What do you suggest?" If I think it's a medical emergency, I'll tell you to get over to the ER as fast as you can. If it's not a medical emergency and you're asking for general advice regarding what we do in the clinic, it doesn't cost you anything to do the texting. There is a nominal price on a monthly basis to have this opportunity. But just pick up your phone anytime you got a question and text. And that's also the VIP program. It's also there on the homepage, gives you more information about it. But with that, it's probably the cheapest insurance you're going to run across, short, of major trauma. It's the cheapest insurance you're going to find. And 20% discount on all supplements by being a member of that program. Now, I want to mention a disclaimer that Mary wrote before I get the show going here too far. And because it exposes the criminal behavior of what's going on right now regarding COVID-19, of not one word about nutrition in the protocols that they're suggesting. Not one. I use the word criminal because I think that's what it is. I know why they don't. Because the drug companies can't make billions of dollars on nutritional advice. And because the drug companies pretty well control what goes on in the media. And all you have to do is sit still for 10 minutes watching CNN or watching Fox and see how many medical commercials there are. And then you know who pays the bills controls the programming. And they're not going to mention a word about nutrition. In fact, we had to do some house cleaning with our website. We were instructed very clearly, get rid of the word coronavirus. COVID-19 virus, immune system support, immune system strength, all this kind of stuff had to go out the window. And so I want to give you this disclaimer. Mary wrote this, and she said 250 years in the future there should be a disclaimer. I think that it should be there now. Here's the disclaimer. These statements, this is after you get your medical advice. In other words, you should be doing hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and Z-Paks. And you're probably going to hear a lot about that this week. Of course, that's after the fact. That's more ambulances in the valley rather than a better fence at the top of the cliff. Medicine is very oriented towards ambulances in the valley. They don't like a better fence at the top. It's counterproductive to the medical model. And certainly, washing your hands for 20 seconds is not a better fence. Staying away from other people is not a better fence. And I'm not saying that's not important. I'm not discounting the fact that the majority of the people who contract this COVID-19 probably never even have one symptom. But they might be a carrier to somebody who will contract serious symptoms. I understand the current advice doing this and doing that. And I'm not saying one word about it one way or the other. If that's what fits your paradigm, then that's what you should be doing. I'm a little concerned about how far the government is going. I mean, this is right on the edge of martial law, telling people they can't be open, telling people they can't congregate. But that's all I'm going to say about that. Here's the statement. Here is a disclaimer that should be said at the end of medical advice. These statements have not been evaluated by a qualified nutritionist. This drug plan and advice is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, heal, or prevent any disease. It's simply a Band-Aid. Please see your qualified nutritional healthcare professional with any drug or surgery treatment plan. Mary, that's, if you're listening, baby, that was fantastic. All right. I had to say that. I just had to do that. Now, I want to thank all of you who are listening. I want to thank all of you who regularly support KTALK Radio and all the various shows and programming. But I hope you can hear me all right. But the next thing that I want to say is usually when people have something to say about medical advice, or they have something to say about healthcare, or they want to get into the nitty-gritty aspects of what's happening with human physiology or anything else, they want to give a whole bunch of references. And all I can say is I'm going to give you places to get references so you can find out where I got my information. I'm not going to reference every point that I make. I'm not going to cite every important thing that I say over the next 2 hours. But I want to give you some places where you can go and find out some stuff for yourself. And so the places to look, and in particular, if there's any medical professionals or healthcare professionals out there listening right now, I would strongly advise you to check out these sources that I'm going to talk about, particularly as what I might say might stir your hackles, get your hackles up, the hair go up on the back of your neck. And the first book, and I've downloaded this the other day. I got it from Amazon. It's a book by an MD, Klaus Kohnlein, Kohnlein, and a journalist who's a part of the book with him. And the book is called Virus Mania. It's not that old, but it has an awful lot to say about the science involving virology, where it is, where it's, whoops, sorry, about the basic concepts of where viral research is right now. Second, it's a website. You might want to jot this down. It's called infectiousmyth.com. And there's a lot of good references there about this current situation that's going on. Third one is a book. It's a little deeper, by a German named Heinrich Kremer, Kremer, The Silent Revolution in Cancer and AIDS Medicine. Gets in a little bit more to the viral aspects of these diseases and what a virus may or may not really be in reality. And then the last one is a book called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Firstenberg. I've talked about him before. We'll be right back. All right, we're back 23 minutes after the hour. That last book, The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Firstenberg, specifically talks about the health consequences of the electromagnetic fields. And if you've heard some of my shows earlier this month, you know that I have brought that topic up a couple of times. And for those of you just tuning in, Mary and I will be doing a webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., questions and answers. You didn't need to register for it at forbiddendoctor.com, right there on the homepage under the sliding pictures. There's a place where you need to register so you're given the link to do it. And through the end of the month, 2 for 1 for new patients at the clinic. We get asked that every day. When are you going to do the next one? Well, we're doing it right now. So the place I kind of want to start here, obviously we've got this situation in the world where apparently there's a lot of people getting sick, and it started in a place called Wuhan, China, and now, there's some other places like northern Italy, and then essentially all around the world, or at least a lot of places in the world where a lot of people are getting sick. And so the question is, why are they getting sick? And of course, the usual theory that we're all being told is that there's some new novel virus called a coronavirus, and that's the cause of why everybody's getting sick. And I thought the first step, we need to look at the history of how we know that a certain disease or a certain set of symptoms is caused by a microorganism at all, and then specifically by a virus. I mean, how do we know that? Historically speaking, in the annals of medicine and medical research, how do we know that? So the best way, I think, would be to explain that. It basically formulated in a set of postulates that started in the early part of the last century, and they're called Koch's postulates. Now, I know I'm a chiropractor. I know I'm not a virologist. I'm not a bacteriologist. I'm not an epidemiologist, but neither are most medical doctors. Neither are most nurses. They just do what they're told. And I only mention that because in chiropractic college, we study virology. We study bacteriology. We study communicable diseases. We study epidemiology. And we study research. So we know how to read the reports that tell us what's going on in those various fields when that particular interest pops up in our head. So, that way, explaining it this way, I think I can explain that because of Koch's postulates, and these are Koch's postulates are the accepted way that we prove that any set of symptoms is actually caused by an infectious agent, as opposed to, say, poisoning or some accidental thing. If you want to be able to prove it was caused by an infectious agent, bacteria or virus, whatever, microbe, whatever, then you have to apply Koch's postulates, because that's accepted as gospel. I mean, that's like the 11th commandment at Mount Sinai. Follow Koch's postulates. And they're used, essentially approved by all infectious disease people and virologists in the world. And so there's basically 4 of these postulates. And I want to take a very simple example so that everybody can understand this. The first postulate, number 1, is that all the people that you're studying have the same set of symptoms. They can't have a variety of symptoms. They have to have the same set of symptoms. And so I want to use the example of meningococcal meningitis. And that's a type of meningitis that's caused by a bacteria called the meningococcus. And essentially, and then we also study microbiology in chiropractic college as well, with labs. And so I'm going to talk about meningococcus in the sense of these 4 postulates. And I'm talking about this, and I'm going to try to be as street language as possible here, so you understand how you prove that something was caused by an infectious agent. And essentially, all the people with that meningococcal meningitis, they're going to have a high fever, they're going to be extremely sick, and they have a very characteristic rash. And if nothing is done, and even sometimes if anything is done, they will usually die from the moment of diagnosis within about 2 to 3 days. And so 100% of these people you're studying all have the exact identical symptoms. Postulate number 1. And once you have a person with those symptoms, then you can take some of their blood and you can do what's called a blood culture, where you try to grow an organism out of their blood, and which we did in school. And what you find is 100% of these people with meningococcal meningitis have a culture of meningococcal meningitis in their blood. 100%, not half of them, not 80%, but 100% of them have it. So now you've got a group you can study. Now, postulate number 2. The next thing is that this postulate is the people, number 1 is that they more or less have the same symptoms. Number 2 is that in those people with these symptoms, they all have the same organism. In other words, when you do a culture and you look at it under a microscope, you see the exact same culture in every single one of these people that are in that group. Postulate number 3 is that none of the people walking around who are normal, presumably, the rest of us, none of us have meningococcal bacteria growing in our blood. It's simply not compatible with normal health. That's postulate number 3. In other words, you got another group over here who do not have those symptoms and do not have a meningococcus colony growing in their bloodstream. Then postulate number 4 is once you have a pure culture then of this meningococcus and you grow it out and you isolate it, you purify that bacteria, then you inject it or expose it to another person, which you don't really want to do. But you give it to an animal. You inject it in an animal that's susceptible to that particular kind of bacteria, and 100% of them get the meningococcal disease. And then out of that 100%, you take blood from the infected animal and grow meningococcus in the blood. And then that can go on forever. But those are the 4 postulates. Now, I just want to stop here for a minute because I don't want to get too technical here, but I think you could follow those 4 guidelines I just gave you. So in other words, the way you prove what's called an infectious etiology, and etiology just means what caused it, where did it come from, or infectious causation, is that we have people with the same, very similar symptoms. We grow in a pure culture, that particular organism, whatever it is that's causing those symptoms, that all of them are experiencing. You get it out of the blood or respiratory secretions or whatever else, wherever that thing is growing. And then you take that organism, you purify it so that you know there's only that organism present. You can do it through filtering. And then you inject it into a susceptible animal and you get the same disease. Then we culture that organism from them and pass it on to another and pass it on to another. And then we know that organism caused that disease. Now, theoretically, you can do the same thing with viruses, like chickenpox. That's a rather common childhood viral infection. More or less every child with chickenpox has the same set of symptoms. Postulate number 1. They have a low-grade fever. Sometimes it's a little higher. They don't feel very good, and they get all these little vesicles, these little blisters. And that's how we know that it is chickenpox. Now, you can take the blood or the fluid from these little bubbles, these little blisters on their skin, and you look at it under an electron microscope, and you'll find millions of copies of that virus in the blood. That's what's called viremia, population of virus in the blood. Or you can find that maybe millions of copies from the bubbles of the blisters on their skin, and you don't find any other virus. You just find a pure culture of chickenpox virus from either the blood or the vesicles. Then you look at normal people, and I'm not sure if I explained the third postulate right, the control group. There's no normal people that have meningococcus growing in their blood. I think I said that. So you take normal people with a chickenpox thing, and you don't find a chickenpox virus in their blood. There's no normal people like you or I walking around that have millions of copies of chickenpox virus in their blood. And we don't have any of those little vesicles. And even if we did have a blister, if we took the fluid out of it, it would not have the chickenpox virus in it. And then, of course, with postulate number 4, you could take some of that virus, you could purify it. And when I say purify it, you're just filtering so that you know that when you inject it or expose it to a test animal, it's the pure culture of chickenpox virus. And then 100% of them who are not immune will get sick. They'll have the chickenpox virus in their blood or their blisters and so on. That is how all doctors who are oriented that way, all virologists, all infectious disease people understand how to absolutely prove beyond doubt an infectious agent. Now, there's a long history of this, which I'm just going to briefly mention, because when you look at what's happening now, the so-called coronavirus COVID-19 epidemic, the first thing you notice is it started in Wuhan, we're told. And then you say, well, what were the symptoms of these people in Wuhan? And the best we know, the symptoms were low-grade fever and dry cough. That's what you're hearing all the time. And unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, but realistically, that's not a very good set of symptoms. I mean, a specific set of symptoms. Because lots of people have more fever and dry cough, including people who have got bronchitis, including people with asthma, people who have been exposed to air pollution. The tree allergy stuff is starting this week. And they have a bit of a dry cough. Maybe they will, maybe they won't have a fever, but they're going to have these non-specific symptoms. And so that first postulate where everybody has the same symptoms is not the case with a coronavirus situation. So then what's the next step? Maybe they have a low-grade fever, maybe they got a dry cough, that's what it's called. But what should have happened? If I was the CDC expert and I was called in to investigate this, or you called in the Chinese virology authorities or the American virology authorities, if you say, look, it looks like we got a new disease here because there's people who have a dry cough and they got a low-grade fever and there's this little shadowing in, if we do a CT scan of their lungs, there's a little shadow starting to show up in their lungs. And we've never seen this particular combination before. Can you come over here and find out and help us out, help us to find out if this is indeed an infectious etiology? I mean, fair enough. So what I want you to do is I want you to line up, and here I am, the CDC expert over in Wuhan, China, because they invited me over to find out what's causing this problem. So I want you to line up 500 people who have the exact same symptoms, and we're going to do an electron microscopy examination of their sputum and their blood, and we're going to find out if all of them have millions of copies of this same exact virus. And then we're going to characterize the virus, and then we're going to kind of see what happens. And the next thing I would do is I take these 500 people who are perfectly normal over here who don't have these symptoms, because you got to have a control group. And you say, well, we're going to look at their blood, and we're going to look at their sputum, see how many of them have millions of copies of the same virus in their blood or their respiratory secretions. And the answer should be 100% of the first 500 have millions of copies, and the second group have 0 millions of copies of the virus in their blood. Then we would purify those millions of copies of the virus from the first group, find some susceptible animal, probably a bat, poor bats, and either inject it or shoot it up their nose or squirt it down their throat, and we would do that for the control. And then, and then we would take, some saline solution or something like that and do the same thing, except to the animals or a sample in the animals that didn't have a sputum or didn't have that stuff. And then we start looking at their blood, and we find the presence of this virus, especially in the animals that had pure blood to begin with. Now we find the virus growing inside the control group. Now that's what should have been done. Now let's look at what was done. And you can get this from PubMed. You're not going to get this from Fox News and CNN and CS or CBS or whatever the other stuff is, because they're on there creating hysterical panic and destroying the economy of the country. But as far as we know, and I'm getting this, you can search this on PubMed for the latest stuff that's been there. You can see this for yourself. You search for articles, people who are sending all kinds of stuff in, and I can't, every day somebody's sending me something, and I appreciate that. I really do. Some of the stuff is rather hysterical and crazy. Some of it's very scientific. I don't know absolutely for certain what's going on. I don't. I watch, I investigate, I research, but I know what the standard is. And when the standard is not followed, then it's anybody's guess after that. And then you bring in marketing, you bring in sales, you bring in political control, and who knows what kind of a panic you can create. So I had people come in to see me yesterday who tried to maintain 6-foot separation. And it was funny. We did a little dance. They wouldn't let me shake their hand. I'm a hugger. I hug everybody I can. Even now I hug people because my immune system needs it. I'm not saying you should do this. From a reasonable professional point of view as a licensed clinician, I'm telling you to follow what you're being told to do. I'm just trying to put a couple ideas in your head. We'll be right back. All right, we're back 44 minutes after the top of the hour. You're listening to Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program here at KTALK, beginning in March of 1995, I might add. Dr. Zen talking about COVID-19, and I'm trying to talk about it from a scientific point of view, not political point of view. I'm trying to explain to you what is the necessary steps to follow to determine an infectious etiology. How do you scientifically prove that something was caused by something? I described it to you. I've used examples, and I'm telling you what they've done because they did not follow the rules. Also, if you're just tuning in, we have as long as you're cooped up and you're having a hard time dealing with the problems that you have physically, we're having a 2-for-1 special until the cooping up is over with. And we also, some people have asked, trying to maintain the social distancing, they've ordered supplements, and we'll bring them out to the curb. You don't have to come in. And we practice good disinfecting procedures inside the office. I practically scrub my hands between each patient. And I'm still busy. Also, a webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mary and I will be answering questions and answers. You have to go to forbiddendoctor.com. There on the homepage, where it says register for the webinar. You have to register, so you're given the code that you can click on at 9 a.m. Mountain Time tomorrow, and be a part of the show. All right. So now, what didn't they do? I told you what they should have done. Let me tell you what they've done. There was not a single person. And how do I know this? Because I'm picking it up off of PubMed.com. The research, the articles that are flowing in right now. This isn't, some lone crazy guy at KTALK Radio trying to tell the world what he thinks. I'm telling you what's going on and what's happened and what hasn't happened that should have happened. You go to PubMed and do a search for yourself for articles. Now, there was not a single person who had these symptoms, as I described earlier, who had millions of copies of this coronavirus isolated from their blood or their sputum. Not one. What they said was, and this is what's been published, I saw the article, we have people who are sick. Okay, given. And, quote, here's a smear of their electron microscopy examination, and you see lots of things. You see cellular debris, you see a number of different things that look like viruses, and one of them actually looks like a coronavirus. I kid you not. Now, that's a completely different story than what I've described about how they would establish meningococcus or chickenpox as a virus. And then they did not do an examination of the electron microscopy of 500 normal people. They didn't do it. Because they could find 500 normal people in Wuhan who did not have any of these symptoms. Now do an electron microscopy study of their blood and their sputum and see if you see the same stuff that's floating around in the sick Wuhanese that do have the symptoms. They didn't do that. How do you compare? You have no comparison. You have no baseline study. Now, the people who wrote the article said, and I quote, "We did not attempt to purify the virus," which, if you think about it, end quote there, which you think is rather mind-boggling after what I just got through to describe Koch's postulates. Because if they didn't pure the virus, how do they know? How do they know that that is what caused the disease? And the answer is, there's no way to know it. But they did take the virus and they did do a genetic sequence of it. And the genetic material, the coronavirus is RNA, not DNA, it's RNA. And they said, quote, "This is a new genetic sequence which we haven't seen in a coronavirus before, therefore this is the cause of the disease." And all I can say is that flies in the face of everything we know about virology and effective causation. And I would also point out, this is not the first time that ever happened. Another example, around the latter part of the 1800s, there were people showing up with a new set of symptoms of acute paralysis, and eventually it was called polio. And because this was the time of Pasteur and the inauguration of the germ theory of disease, which, by the way, if you've studied this or you've heard me on my show long enough, you know that Pasteur recanted it about the time of his death. And he said it's the terrain. The germ theory, he said, is nothing. It's actually the terrain and the experience of that particular person, which would include nutritional status. But I'm going to skip that for a bit. They had these bunch of people with the symptoms of acute paralysis, which they called polio. And it was also the same time when they started spraying orchards and apple trees with something called lead arsenate. And I've done shows on this. We've done podcasts on this. Wherever right there in Vermont, I can't remember the name of the town, 1886, something like that, where the first real outbreak of polio started to show up. It was the same area where they decided to get rid of the gypsy moth and some of the other things that were infecting the crops with heavy spraying of lead arsenate with no warning to the public. So they were spraying orchards, apple trees, And the part of your body that has the pathology, the part of your body that will demonstrate the fact that it has lead poisoning, is what's called the anterior horn cells of the nervous system. And we study that. We study that for a year in chiropractic college. And that's why you get paralysis. And it turns out, and that's the area where the polio virus attacks, the anterior horn, the motor control of the spinal cord. It's exactly where lead arsenate and later DDT exactly attacks that part of the nervous system. So anyways, they said, well, it has to be an infection. And so what they did, and I would say what they didn't, believe it or not, if you go to and this is in the book Virus Mania, you'll see the entire documentation of what I just said. There's also another book, The Moth and the Iron Lung, by Forrest Marady, Maready. The Moth and the Iron Lung tells a narrative story of the exact same thing. This is why I think later on they could find children with symptoms of polio but no polio virus. And then they would find children with polio virus but no polio symptoms. But that's another story. So what they did, and you can read about it in the book Virus Mania. It's available at Amazon, a reasonable price. They took children who were paralyzed and some of them who had died, and they extracted some of the spinal cord that was diseased, or their brain tissue after they died, of course. And they basically chopped it up like in a blender. They didn't purify it. They didn't see if there was a virus. They didn't have electron microscopes back then, so they couldn't see a virus. They didn't see a bacteria. They didn't even filter it. They just took this stuff, chopped it up, essentially spinal cord tissue, and they gave it to monkeys to drink. This is all a matter of record. But interestingly, nothing happened. Nothing happened to those monkeys. And that was one of the big conundrums of this polio virus situation, is they couldn't find any animal that they could make sick doing this. So then they injected it, subcutaneously, like you would give a vaccine. And they would subcutaneously inject it into the arms of monkeys, and none of them got sick. And so they decided they have to prove that it was an infectious disease. So they took a child who was paralyzed. They took some of the disease of the anterior horn cells from the nervous system. They chopped it up. They took 2 monkeys. They drilled holes in the skulls of these monkeys and injected about 1/4 of a cup of this unpurified spinal fluid goop into their brains. One of the monkeys died. The other one became paralyzed. I mean, you can see a picture of a researcher, holding up a monkey saying, "Ah ha ha! This paralyzed monkey proves that it's a disease. It's an infectious disease." Now, if you ask me to make something out of that study, I would just say, boy, if I was a monkey and somebody came at me with a bunch of goop and we're going to drill a hole in your skull and pour this goosh in there, I would run for my life. Now, the same thing, the same failure of evidence was done with the H1N1 situation. It was done with, and it was done with SARS, and it was done with Hep C, and it was done with Ebola, and it was done with Zika. The same crazy approach to establishing a viral etiology. And obviously, this is not what's going on right now. Is not the first rodeo for the failure of the infectious disease community to follow the actual laws and rules that they set up to prove an infectious cause of a disease. So that's the first thing. Here, the whole first hour is over with. I haven't stopped talking sun up to sundown. I'm getting a little tired here. But that's the first thing that you have to understand. Now, some of you, maybe a lot of you, would ask the question, but don't we have a test that shows that it's caused by a virus? Isn't that what they're testing all around the country right now? This 5-minute test, this 2-minute test? Sometimes I get a little too smart alecky about this whole thing, I have to admit. But I'll ask, do you know what that test is? Don't we have a test for this? Yeah. Do you know what that test is? The test is called an RT-PCR test. And I'm probably have to get this during the next hour. I get a little worked up here, and you have to forgive me. It's known as a viral load test. And the test is a surrogate test. And I'll explain that. It was developed by a guy named Kerry Mullis, who was given the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for essentially inventing the technique of this test. And he said very specifically, you can't use this test to prove infectious etiology or to diagnose an infectious disease. The test that they're administering now, the developer of that test, who got the Nobel Prize for doing it, says you cannot prove infectious etiology or diagnose an infectious disease using this test, which, of course, is interesting because if you can't use it to diagnose an infectious disease, that begs the question, what do you use it for? But I'm going to back up here a second to describe what a surrogate test means. There are direct tests, there are surrogate tests, and I've only got a couple of minutes, but maybe I can jump into this. A surrogate test just simply means it's a situation where you're trying to prove causation, and you have to have a gold standard test. Those were the postulates that I talked about at the beginning of the show, like with meningococcus. That's a gold standard test. It's reliable 100% of the time. And as some people know, as I often do on my show here, I often use analogies. So I'm borrowing this analogy from Thomas Cowan. I think it's really good. Let's say you go into a town. You want to know how many feet are in that town. Not distance, but feet on the end of a leg. And the question is, how many feet are there in Barrow, Alaska? And obviously the gold standard test is to go into that town, have everybody show up at the town square, and then count their feet. And I go one thing, you find out there's 1,112 feet. And you know that's accurate because you counted them. Then you go to the next town and you say, okay, everybody come to the center. And 100% of them show up to count your feet. And you get 3,000 feet. And you go to another town and you do this 4 or 5 times. And you have established 100% foolproof way of knowing how many feet are in a town. In that situation, you can initiate a surrogate test. I'll tell you about that after the break. And 4 minutes after the top of the hour, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program here at KTALK. I'm grateful to KTALK to be able to do this. I'm also grateful for you guys that listen. Actually pay attention to this show. A couple of good off-air calls. Michelle, thinking that... Michelle, I hope you don't mind mentioning your name, but everybody knows you because you're a regular. She just said, the emperor has no clothes. Yeah, you think it's getting that obvious? The emperor is wearing no clothes. It's beginning to be obvious there's something else going on. Yes, I understand that. But I want to stay on the science part of this, or the lack of science. Let me put it that way. I want to stay on the absence of science in this process. And I also want to also put emphasis on the incredible dereliction of our health services in this country that leave nutrition out of the picture. Who makes up the majority population of the people who are dying from this? Very sick people. Where did that sickness come from? Majority of them, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, diseases that are easily addressed through nutritional changes. And we know that. A lifetime of reading at PubMed shows you in very well peer-reviewed published reports what lifestyle changes can do to those diseases. And they don't wash your hands, maintain 6-foot separation. I'm not telling you to not do those things. I'm telling you to do those things. But I'm also telling you to exercise a little common sense in all of this. So I spent the first hour with some scientific aspects of what's taking place here, why it's taking place, and hopefully with the idea that you'll have a better understanding of Koch's postulates. And if you had any introduction to biochemistry or biology beyond 8th grade level, you may have been introduced to Koch's postulates. Dr. Koch was a German, and he put those 4 postulates together that I think are they could be the 11th commandment coming down off Sinai to prove infectious etiology. And if those postulates fail in their attempt to prove something, you know it wasn't an infectious etiology. It was something else. Now, what the test that they're giving out there that I mentioned a few moments ago, the RT-PCR test, essentially is a surrogate test. What's a surrogate test? Well, I told you a hardcore test, we're using Barrow, Alaska's, the feet that are in Barrow, Alaska. And we go to several different towns. All 100% of the people show up, we count their feet. Now we know exactly. We have an ironclad test to determine how many feet are in a town. Now you with that basis, you can use a surrogate test. What do I mean by that? Well, you can say, well, I don't want to count everybody's feet. I know that everybody who has a foot has a shoe, and everybody who has a shoe has a shoelace. And there's only one shoe store in town that sells shoelaces. So I'm just going to go to that store and see how many people bought shoelaces this last year. That's going to tell me how many feet there are. That's what's called a surrogate test. Now, obviously, there's problems with that. Every one of those assumptions had better be correct. I mean, for instance, how do you know everybody's purchased shoes? Maybe some people don't like shoes. And then how do you know everybody has only one pair of shoes? Maybe, I know women who've 4 pairs, 6 pairs, 10 pairs. I mean, I have several pairs of shoes, for Pete's sake. And what if some of those shoes don't have shoelaces? What if they're sandals? I have 2 pairs of sandals with no shoelaces. So what happens? Well, the point is, unless you know all those things, and unless you have a gold standard you can compare it to, you can't use a surrogate test to prove a damn thing. And that's what's happening with all these tests they're doing around the country. And what is the surrogate test? Now, remember, we don't have a gold standard. We don't have, based on postulates that I talked about earlier with the coronavirus, we don't have isolation, purification, reinfection, so we can't prove viremia. We don't have millions of copies demonstrated on an electron microscope. We essentially have no idea who has the coronavirus disease, except as may be tested through a surrogate test. Now, take a piece of one of these coronaviruses, the new one they found, and it has this new RNA sequence in it that hasn't been found before. Then they take one of these sequences, which they say is unique, that's unique particularly to this particular virus, and they do something that they call amplify. And that's what that means is that, in your blood you have one copy of this particular sequence, but it's too small to find it. You think looking at a virus under an electron microscope, it's like having a telescope in orbit over top of Utah. And you're trying to determine how many people are in Utah. But that electron microscope is focused at 4th and Main in downtown Salt Lake. And you're going to try to determine how many people there are in Utah. That's how crazy that is. So you have to amplify it. And what you do is you kind of stimulate the whole thing. And this is how this Kerry Mullis came up with his test and his Nobel Prize, is that you make 2 copies of what you're looking at. That's one cycle. Then you make 4 copies. And then you make, to the 20th power worth of copies, whatever number that is, 20 different cycles. Amplify it, amplify it, amplify it. And what you find with this test is that once you put it through approximately about 36 cycles, you begin to see changes that tells you, this is a positive test. And if you do it 35 times, it's still too small to see. If you do 36 times, something's starting to show up. If you do 37 times and you see 5% of the time people have these symptoms, that's the number. You have to do the test 37 times. So we're going to do we're not going to take 500 people, or we're not going to take every person we think and do an electron microscopy of their blood. We're just going to take a sample of their blood, multiply it over 37 times, and if we see the tiniest little fragment in there, they got it. They got the disease. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because if you do it 40 times, then you start seeing a whole lot more positives. And then there's something else If you do 60 times and you amplify that over and over again, it becomes positive with 100% of the people. Now, how many times is it being amplified? Well, we don't know. We haven't been told. But I want to say that again. If you amplify the sample test over 60 times, which you can do with these test equipments, it'll be positive with everybody. That means everybody has a piece of this RNA somewhere in their cells or in their genome or in their secretions. And all you have to do is multiply it enough times that it starts to show up. Do you have an AIDS virus in you? When we multiply your blood long enough, we'll see it in there. Do you have a Zika virus in you? We multiply your blood enough times, we'll see it in there. That's the problem with a surrogate test. And the problem is we don't know how many false positives or false negatives there are because we don't have anything to compare it to. And all the biological tests have false positives. The most prevalent false positive test in the hospital is the PSA test for prostate problems. The protein-specific antigen test has the most false positives of all. What's that mean? It can show positive when it shouldn't be showing positive. That's what it means. So you multiply this enough times. Let's say you test 30 million people, and you have a 1% false positive rate, which is low. That's 300,000 people by definition that will test positive. And then when you got 300,000 people, boy, you got an epidemic. And then if you want to demonstrate that the epidemic got better, all you have to do is lower the amplification cycles back down to 35. And suddenly your vitamin C treatment or your vaccines or your chloroquine or whatever you did worked because there's no more people testing positive because you don't amplify the test enough. This is fraught with problems. And that is the problem. And unfortunately, every country has their own standard of how many times they're going to amplify the cycles they put these blood tests through. So you're going to see a lot of different numbers coming out of very different places depending on the number of amplification cycles that they're standardizing their tests to. Now, I hope you get the point that this is a crazy situation. And so let's go to the next thing. People are asking, how do you know this is a virus? I can't speak for the health professionals of Utah. I know they're good people. I know they're doing the best job they can with the limited understanding of what's taking place. I know there's political pressures. I know there's job pressures. I know there's standard of care pressures. But I think if you took the majority of these people and you said to them, how do you know this is a virus? I think this is what they would say. Well, what else could it be? And I would contend that is the wrong question. Let me give you another example. This is kind of crazy. I also get this from Thomas Cowan. I think it's a great analogy. Let's say you go to Lubbock, Texas. And every morning at 8 o'clock, you go out running around the track. You know, you're 4 times for your mile or 6 times, whatever. And inside the track, there's a football field like there are in most high school track field. And the football field is covered with grass. And so every day you go running around the track. However, one morning you go there at this usual time about 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's this 5-story boulder in the middle of the grassy field that covers about half of the track. You can't miss it. But underneath the boulder, the grass is perfectly normal. There's no indentation or anything else. No smashing down. And, you know, the grass looks perfectly normal, and you go home thinking, wow, I don't know what happened here. How did that boulder get there? And then when you get home, you hear on the news, in Lubbock, Texas today, a boulder fell from the sky. It's probably a meteor, and it landed in the middle of our football field. And I think most people would say, hey, wait a minute. The people who went out there and looked at it, wait a minute. If a thing like that fell from the sky, I would expect there to be a crater, or at least the grass would be messed up or something. But in fact, the grass is perfectly okay. And so I think you would be rather skeptical of their explanation that a meteor fell from the sky, which is probably the most common thing for people to think, who don't examine, who don't research, who don't ask why or what or how. And then if somebody said, well, So what did happen? And well, I don't know. I wasn't there when it happened. Maybe somebody put it there with a forklift or a crane. Maybe fairies brought it in and put it there. I don't know. They did it very carefully because they didn't disturb the grass. I don't know what happened, but I know what you're saying supposedly happened, that it fell from the sky. I know that didn't happen. And the reason I say that now is because the first part of all of this, and I hope I explained that well enough at the very beginning of what I was talking about, is I think we should be very skeptical. How do you prove a virus exists? And did these people running around actually prove through something as ironclad as Koch's postulates that a virus is the cause of all of this, as to what may be accounting for this kind of a problem that's going on? Now, the first thing I want to say, and I have no privy information to how bad it really is or what's going to happen, or no privy information as to whether or not these statistics are correct. You know, I've heard statistics that the mortality rate in Italy and in China actually hasn't gone up. I mean, that's some of the latest stuff, and the curve is starting to flatten a little bit, and you know that they track it, and they'll be tracking this month to month, week to week, number of years to come yet. They'll be tracking this because they said, Fauci himself said, Dr. Fauci, it's going to be back here in the fall. And this is what's known as excess mortality. I've heard is that there hasn't been excess mortality yet. But it's possible that that's wrong. Maybe there is. It's possible that it's going to happen later on. Maybe it'll happen later this summer. Maybe it'll completely disappear during the summer like most viruses do. I don't know. I don't pretend to know things that other people don't know either just because of this. I just don't know. But let's say something is happening. And maybe that something is actually going on that's a real problem here. Which, by the way, is unlike what was predicted, you know, with things like H5N1 and Ebola and Zika and SARS and those other things. I mean, with all those, Zika especially, we were saying every child born from now on is going to have a pinhead, microcephaly. They're going to be horribly retarded. And we were told we're all going to die of H5N1, according to Dr. Fauci. At one time he said that. He said something like 10% of us are going to die from H5N1. And it was going to be a huge catastrophe, and it didn't happen. But it's possible it could have happened. Again, I don't know. I know where to go for my research. I know not to trust somebody else's opinion. And don't you trust my opinion. You search this stuff out for yourself. You go to those resources I gave you at the beginning of my show. You research this for yourself so you know in your own heart, or have a good idea anyway, what's going on. We'll be right back. "23 minutes after the hour, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program this morning. Some of you may have questions about your own current health status. That's why we offer the free symptom survey at ForbiddenDoctor.com. And I mean free. The survey is free. The analysis of it is free. And the 30-minute phone call that follows it is free. You want to go further, there's a charge. But you can get an analysis from our best nutritionists, and we often consult with them if there's a particular issue that comes up. And in a matter of hours to days, you can get results back to you quickly based on this test. You go to ForbiddenDoctor.com and it'll say there, symptom survey. Take a free symptom survey. It costs you nothing. You get a very interesting nutritional profile of your body based on your symptoms. Imagine that. All right. And then again, we're offering through, as long as you're cooped up in the house, you start getting cabin fever, you're looking at each other too long, and you want to talk to a divorce lawyer because you're not getting an 8-hour break from one another enough, we're offering a 2-for-1 special in the office. As long as we're all cooped up, We're offering a 2-for-1 for new patients, probably right through the end of April if we are going to do that. But we're open. Our office is open and will remain open, regardless of what the idiot governor of Colorado thinks. Criminal behavior on his part, as far as I'm concerned, regarding chiropractic. And a webinar tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Mary and I will be conducting a webinar. Hopefully my voice will be a little stronger by then. You have to register for it because you have to have a link. Those of you calling in, all lines are full, but I have to get through this point. I have to get through this point first, and before I can take phone calls. So, and then phone calls on top of everything else. So if you want to hold on, I will try to equipment. I'll tell you. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I think they use this phone system to announce Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Sorry, I can't hold on to it, but I'll try to answer calls during the next break. All right, let me go on here. So I said we can speculate on what's going on here, but a closer inspection, because all of the standard tests of medical research have not been applied to the COVID-19. I know that because I read the research at PubMed coming in. And so in order to know, I mean, we can speculate on what's taking place here. And, well, the surrogate test, I wanted to finish that, but that's what the testing so far has been, is a surrogate test. I think I finished discussing that. You multiply something over enough times, magnify it enough times, you start to see something there that you wouldn't have seen earlier. And if you drop the magnification level down a little bit, suddenly it disappears. Who controls those things? Well, the individual researchers and the money behind them. Now, here again, I want to refer to a lecture given by one of the most prominent virologists in the world, Herbert Virgin, MD, PhD. And he gave an update on what we actually know about viruses. And he said this. Now listen carefully, because you may never have heard this before. So quote, a virus is a piece of genetic material, either a DNA or an RNA. Sometimes it has other proteins in it. Then it has a capsule, which is made out of the cell membrane of the host cell. In other words, your cell. What is that capsule that surrounds the protein? It's made out of the same material that walls the cell of the cell it came out of. So what Dr. Virgin is bringing up, very much like even in the example of chickenpox, it turns out that we have what's called a viral iome. You've heard Mary and I for years talk about the the microbiome, of the bacteria, virus, microbes that live and exist in your gut. There's a viral iome that exists inside of you as well. And much like the microbiome, and we have essentially all these pieces of RNA and DNA in our cells in our genetic material. And now they're saying that 20% of our actual chromosomes are just junk. It doesn't have anything to do with cellular replication. Or now they're saying that they're actually viruses that have merged with our DNA. That is significant. This is coming out of some of the most foremost virologists of today. That this junk in our chromosomes is really a virus that's merged with our DNA. And when you go back to the PCR test I was talking about and realize 100% of the people, if you look hard enough, will have essentially every single sequence that exists on this planet inside. their cellular structures. If you multiply it enough, you'll find every single strand that exists in human physiology if you look far enough and deep enough. And so the newer theory of this that's emerging, and the theory that I think is the most reasonable, is that if you poison a cell, if you cause degradation of the genetic material of that cell, either the RNA or the DNA, that is going to cause the production of millions of copies of this poisoned DNA. And the body is going to package it up and send it out as a messenger by to the poisoning of the other cells, to the other tissues, even to people around you, maybe to other species. In other words, you heard me. In other words, we know that these so-called viruses are not free living. They emerge from within your cell, and we think they emerge when you have broken down DNA. That is what some of the foremost virologists are saying. It's not a transmissible disease. It's simply the evidence of a poisoned cell. So essentially the question is this coming from inside because you're poisoned, or is this an actual infection coming from the outside? Well, it's possible. It could be both. Either one in different situations. But we also know, as Dr. Skip Virgin points out in this paper, this is becoming more and more accepted. It's called the ecozone. ECO, you can Google this. ECO zone theory, where when the body is poisoned, it generates these little viral particles that are pieces of DNA which it encapsulates. It then sends them out as messengers to other cells in the body. There's a new danger in town. Prepare yourself. And interestingly enough, that is exactly what trees do. Because if you get a beetle infestation of a tree in a forest, and the tree makes these messengers. They're not exactly like viruses because they're not pieces of genetic material, but they're chemical and hormone messengers. And when they're secreted by the roots of the tree, where they're picked up by other trees, and the other trees make an immunological reaction under the bark to protect themselves from this new attack. And so what Dr. Virgin is saying, these new viruses, they're just a rapid deployment system, because the usual sort of mutation theory that we're hearing about with viruses all the time, where you're waiting for certain kinds of selection or survival of the fitness of the particular viral entity, is way too slow. And so the organisms have learned to send out these pieces of genetic material as messengers to get the other members of the species to do something about it. This is amazing. Now, it gets very complicated, because if you see these viruses actually as poisons or messengers secreted by the cell to have an effect on the world outside of you, there is a new danger afoot, and it could be on the level of an existential crisis. Now, you can imagine then that when you say, well, this looks like contagion because everybody in the same place is getting sick. Now, the first thing I want to say, I have no particular, as I was talking about earlier there, any real, or I'm not really privy to the exact specifics as to what's happened in Wuhan or northern Italy. But the first thing I would say about the fact that so many people in the same place are getting sick does not absolutely prove contagion. Just imagine Hiroshima in 1945. They dropped the bomb. A lot of people in the same place got very sick. Wasn't an infection, wasn't a virus. And over time, that radiation poisoning spread to other villages and the prefects. And then they got sick, and that wasn't an infection either. Even though they were seeing the same set of diseases and symptoms, it was not an infection. Same thing happened in Chernobyl. It started in one place. A lot of people in the same place got sick. They had the same symptoms. It started spreading, and people all over Eastern Europe started to get sick. So the argument that the same people in the same place got sick is not part of Koch's postulates, and that's not how you prove infectious etiology. And here's where it gets real interesting. If it's true that if somebody is poisoned and they send out messengers to their friends, you should do something about this kind of message. And their friends might also get an immunological reaction as well, and they look like they're sick. Yeah, that's a sort of contagion in a sense, but not in the true sense of the word. And I would propose that that's what's happening right now. So the next question is, I mean, we can speculate on what may be the source of the poison. As I said, several radio shows in a row now. I just want to reiterate, there is good precedence and common sense in thinking these diseases, which we are ascribing to an infectious etiology, that we have to maintain 6-foot separation to prevent that spreading, may actually just be a poison. Now, I think that the cells are poisoned, and the cells are trying to detoxify the poison inside themselves. At the same time, they're trying to message other cells through these entities. Now, one of the examples I like to use, and I get this from Dr. Cowan, and I've talked about it in radio shows in the past, is that you're a world famous dolphin doctor. And nobody knows dolphins like you know dolphins. And somewhere, and I think I used the up north of the Arctic Circle, and I don't even know if there's dolphins up there, but I presume there are. And they're always fine, and they follow the ships, and they do whatever they do. But somebody calls you up and says, "Hey doc, we got a bunch of dolphins. I hear they're getting sick." And then they said, "You can come up here, but you can only ask one question about what's happening." And the questions are, A, do these dolphins have a genetic disease? Which would be a stupid question, or B, do these dolphins have a virus? Can I find a transmission of a virus from this dolphin to this dolphin? Or C, did somebody put some crap in the water? No, I think most of you would agree that C is almost always the culprit 100% of the time, and that's exactly what has happened. Somebody put some crap in the water. So the question is, was it the Exxon Valdez? And a few weeks later, you got all these dead dolphins that don't have a virus, but they all have the same symptoms, and they're all dying. Was it DDT? Now, again, this is somewhat speculation because essentially nobody is really looking into this. Or at least I haven't found any evidence of it. I have been suggesting that 5G has something to get to this, and that's what I want to definitely get into before the show's over. But to number one, you look at the situation in northern Italy and Wuhan, two of the most air-polluted places on the planet. It's a matter of record. And to make it even more interesting, as you read the research in glyphosates, that in Italy in particular, a lot of Europe, they fairly recently had this dramatic shift towards biodiesel, which is supposedly, the green fuel of the future. And they're burning this biodiesel that comes from corn, and all that fine diesel exhaust is going into the air. Now, I don't know if you want to take a guess as to how much of that corn came from true biodiesel that's coming from true biodynamic corn. But I'll tell you, because I have a very good guess, and the answer is none of it. It's all coming from GMO corn, heavily sprayed with glyphosate, which gets into the body of the corn, which is then spewed out of the exhaust, which we breathe in, and has the effect of degrading the DNA inside our cells. We know that. And these degraded DNA cells are possibly being packaged up by the cells, and that's very similar to what we call a virus. And because it's a new phenomena, it looks like, quote, a novel virus. That's one explanation. Another one is from eyewitnesses of people in both places, saying that in both of these places, prior to in northern Italy and prior to Wuhan, they had a massive rollout of a new vaccination program, weeks, months, year leading up to it. And that's what happens. You're basically injecting heavy metals, particularly aluminum, into these people, which we know has a neurotoxic and a genotoxic effect. And we know that from research. And we're putting all kinds of metallic particles in the air, like aluminum, part of the geoengineering program. Been going on for a long time. We'll be right back. 43 minutes after the hour, you're listening to the Jack Stockwell radio talk show program. The doctor is in, and I'm going over my notes, largely which come from one of my mentors, Dr. Thomas Cowan of San Francisco, an MD, an anthroposophical doctor. Fourfoldhealing.com is his website. He has tons of really good information. And a lot of my notes here are from accumulation of stuff he's been talking about. And you can sign up for his webinars at fourfoldhealing.com. And he's definitely outside the envelope as far as status quo is concerned. So I was talking about the geoengineering program, how that played into that. You know, now would I say that I am 100% sure of geoengineering? I've always thought that's what chemtrails were all about. I wouldn't say I'm absolutely certain, but I think there's good evidence that that's what's been going on. And this is all the things that are happening in the air, which affects people's lungs and affects the integrity of their genes. And it goes right back to what Carrie Mullis said you can use the PCR test for. If you have accelerated degradation of your genes and then you lower the cycles until you disappears or you increase the cycles till you find it. And if you do something to a person and you only find after 40 cycles, you know, and then you do something and then you only find it after 35, that usually demonstrates they've got less degradation of their genetic material. Doesn't mean that's the cause. It's just less degradation. So we're putting at least three things that we know of in those spots that are degrading the genes, causing people to secrete these poisons and affecting their lung function. And then from everything else I can gather, there's a new sheriff in town called a new rollout of the accelerated 4G and 5G radio frequencies. Now, there's two things we know about. One is that radio frequencies of whatever sort cause accelerated degradation of the DNA in the cell, which is exactly what we're seeing here. And number two, in particular, the 5G interferes with the integrity of oxygen in the air. Oh, yeah. That electrical field going through the air alters the oxygen. So the oxygen becomes less bioavailable, which results in deterioration of the lung function. So here you have a situation where the symptoms are degradation of the DNA or the RNA, in this case of COVID-19, and poor lung function and trauma to the lungs, causing bleeding and other symptoms of dry cough. That's exactly what you would predict from these new toxic insults, I think, that are happening, particularly in those places in the body. So, you know, you could then postulate that the body sends signals out to the world saying, hey, stop what you're doing. We've got a new problem here. And this is a new influence, and it's spreading all over the world. And the 5G system was rolled out on the cruise ship where everybody got sick. The 5G system was rolled out where the nursing homes were in Washington, where the supposed outbreak happened. I think I mentioned last week, Mary and I had a conversation with a friend of ours who's a 5G engineer, and he installs the apparatus for the antennas. And I asked him last week, where's the major areas in America where we now have full 5G rollout? Seattle, Chicago, New York. How about here in Utah? The University of Utah and some places in Holiday. Is it going to be anywhere else? Oh, yeah, it's going to be all over the state. It's going to take a while to install all those antennas, but they're going up. So, while I wouldn't say that's any proof of my theory by any means, I would say, given the history of the relationship between electromagnetic fields and viral outbreaks or pandemics or epidemics, all of which is meticulously laid out in The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. You can get that. I have it in Kindle on my laptop. Firstenberg, Arthur Firstenberg, The Invisible Rainbow, where you can certainly read it for yourself. So what are you going to do with the degradation of cells? Well, you need some kind of cellular immunity. So we have a lot of information on this at forbiddendoctor.com. There's 3 search bars on the homepage where you can search podcasts and blogs, you can search products, you can search protocols that we recommend. Just put in flu, and it'll tell you what we think. But, we can't put coronavirus. The FTC and the FDA don't like that stuff. Not to mention Merck and Hoffman, LaRoche, and AstraZeneca, and all the rest of them. However, I think it's extremely irresponsible for us not to question whether 5G is involved in all of this. Because where you see the outbreaks, you see 5G rollout. Is it 5G the cause? There's a lot of causes that cause DNA and RNA degradation inside the cell. Malnutrition will do it. And so if that's involved, if 5G is involved, or if any of these things are involved, that's something that is urgent to do something about now. Because this is, as I said a moment ago, an existential threat to all of us if we continue with this glyphosate toxicity, the aluminum toxicity, and this new and accelerated electromagnetic smog that's poisoning the entire planet. So we recommend a protocol, therapeutic support for before, during, and after flu problems, virus problems, if you want to attack the disease end of it. What are you going to do about the 5G stuff? I suggest you get a 5G meter like I did. You can go to Amazon, just search 5G. I got the Trifeld, TF2, I think, model. It's $160, $170, but it's very effective. So I'm just going to stop there as far as my explanation of what's causing this. I just want to say that a lot of people are saying, well, Jack, what are we going to do about this? Now, I'm not here to give anybody any particular medical advice. And I'm not here to say whether or not you should follow certain guidelines or not. I'm here just trying to explain where I'm at in my understanding of this so far about what's happening here. And again, a lot of it comes from Dr. Thomas Cowan. Many of you may be familiar with him. A lot of it comes from research at PubMed that anybody can go to and research. You can always read the abstracts. So what do you do to strengthen your body? I could go into a lot of questions and answers here and go deeper into this thing, but we're really running out of time. But what are some basic ideas? Get off of sugar. Sugar stuns the immune system. And then complement it with, one of the things about building up electricity in the system, I like the grounding ideas, the earthing ideas, walking barefoot in the grass. I also like the idea of extending our arms of humanity towards each other. That's the anti-humanity thing with 6-foot separation. I'm a hugger. I'll hug anybody that wants to hug. I want their viruses. I want their bacteria. It strengthens my own immune system. But you follow the rules. Don't you go out there and start hugging anybody. You maintain that 6-foot separation. Keep washing your hands. Cover your mouth if you're sneezing or coughing, and then wash your hands immediately. Stay away from people who are sick. If there is an infectious agent to this, and there may be somewhat, I think the majority of the problem is what I've described. But if there's an infectious agent and you pick it up and you're healthy, you're going to have no symptoms. But you could carry it to somebody who is sick. People, especially people who are diabetic, and have cardiovascular disease at the same time. These seem to be the most susceptible to this, at least right now so far. Now, I'm going to try and squeeze in a call or two here. I just want to mention one more time, as long as we're all cooped up together and we're driving each other crazy, we're offering a 2-for-1 for new patients at the office through the entire month. And if you need supplements that strengthen the integrity of the cell, if you need supplements that strengthen the integrity of your immune system, they exist. We have them. And we'll bring them out to the car. You don't even have to come into the office if you want. Mary and I are doing a webinar tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We can go into this even further with questions and answers. But you have to register for it at forbiddendoctor.com. There's a little registration thing there where you click on it and you put in your email, and you will be sent a link to link up at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And we have a new VIP level of telemedicine that we can deal with you directly if you want. And I just want to mention one more time, just the thing that I find so stunning is this criminal behavior of not including nutrition in the protocol, because the pharmaceutical industry simply will not allow, not for one moment, that kind of derelict behavior. And I was looking for this. Mary put this together. I think this is great. This is a disclaimer. If she could go to sleep for 250 years and wake up 250 years from now, a disclaimer might say this: following a medical diagnosis. These statements have not been evaluated by a qualified nutritionist. This drug plan and advice is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or heal, or prevent any disease. It is simply a Band-Aid. Please see your qualified nutritional healthcare professional with any drug or surgery treatment plan. That's brilliant, Mary. All right, listen, maybe the last one will make it on here. Caller, your name?
Yeah, it's Arkansas, Dave.
Yeah, Dave.
Has anyone determined, I've made this call about 3 times in the last week, has anyone determined, does Jenny Wilson have the right to suspend habeas corpus, suspend the U.S. Constitution, and arrest people for standing too close to each other?
You know, I mentioned that at the beginning of this show. I didn't want to get in too much into the politics of this whole thing. I wanted to stay health. However, that's under the aegis of martial law, isn't it?
It is. Now, did this Utah State Legislature give the county mayors power to declare an emergency and suspend habeas corpus, or does the Utah State Constitution? I know that in the U.S. Constitution, the only one who has the power to do that is the president. Yeah. In times of civil unrest, or I think it said foreign invasion.
Oh, yeah.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, if Rosie Rivera arrests somebody, she can be sued for enforcing these coronavirus edicts. But they're just arbitrarily making edicts, laws, and punishments when they don't have any authority. Yeah,
I kind of wondered how they can order businesses to shut down. Heck, and Jenny Wilson reminds me of my cat Lucy. Lucy knows what she can do and what she can't do, but she'll always push the envelope to see how far she can get away with what.
That's what's going on. They're pushing the envelope, and that completely misses the point that this COVID-19 is a complete hoax. You have a good day, Jack.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate it. I think I'll just wrap it up here again. We're doing a 2-for-1 at the office, and I think the last time we did this was November, maybe Christmas. 2 people for the price of 1 through the month of April, or as long as this enforcement or this enforcement of your First Amendment right to assemble is continued. I'm going to try and get this radio show up on the website as soon as I can. Whatever I can do to get that done. Again, tomorrow morning, Mary and I will be answering questions relative to this whole thing. 9 a.m. Mountain Time. You register at forbiddendoctor.com. We need your email to send you the link. We do not sell emails to other people. We don't do that. But I hope this has been instructive. And I hope it's put another idea in your head that maybe you've been sold a bill of goods. But I am not offering medical advice. I'm not telling you to ignore what you've been told by health officials in the county, the state, or the federal government. I suggest you follow them as your best ability. See you next week. And then the protocols, of course, are at forbiddendoctor.com. See you next week.